You know, let's imagine for a moment that you're a movie director and a movie studio approaches you about remaking a horror classic. What would you say? Would you say yes? Would you say no? Or would you say, I feel like that's the worst thing any filmmaker can do? You're only going to make yourself look like an asshole by remaking it. If you chose the third option, that means you're famed rock star and all-around smelly-looking guy, Rob Zombie, because that's exactly what he said about doing remakes of horror films just 5 years before his remake of Halloween came to theaters, which either makes him very forgetful or
the leading asshole in the state.
And that's what we're going to talk about today. Do you like movies where people scream all the time? Well, then I've got a movie made just for you. Strap yourself in and try your best to not pull the trigger, folks, as we take a spoiler-heavy look at Rob Zombie's Halloween. So, Rob Zombie's Halloween starts like any great Halloween movie in the fictional town of Haddonfield, which is located in the real state of Illinois, which is famous for its deep dish pizza, the first McDonald's franchise, and where the National Socialist Party of America was granted the right to hold demonstrations after winning a landmark Supreme Court case in 1977.
Illinois Nazis. I hate Illinois Nazis.
And this is where we meet the Myers family, a shining example of what a loving, caring, and nurturing family looks like.
Fucking horse!
Nah, I'm just kidding. They're actually gross, loud, abusive white trash, all of whom look like they haven't taken a bath in weeks, and more than likely have a meth lab in their basement. There's Deborah, a part-time mom and full-time stripper, her daughter, Judith, who apparently just got a job at the whore factory. The baby, Angel Myers, who is sadly caught up in all this. Deborah's boyfriend, Ronnie, who is an alcoholic with no job and possibly a pedophile.
Man, that bitch got herself a nice little dumper.
And of course, the reason that we're all here, Michael. So by now, you're probably asking yourself, why would Rob Zombie change the Myers family from a normal suburban family into a bunch of loudmouth hillbillies? Well, because this is a Rob Zombie movie, and that's kind of what he does.
I'm all broken up here, bitch. I can't work.
God, you're pathetic.
Flappy ass tit. Man, that bitch got herself a nice little dumper.
We then cut to Michael at school, where we see that he's being bullied by a group of larger kids, which causes Deborah to come to the school where she meets child psychologist and sunglasses enthusiast Dr. Samuel Loomis, who shows her some disturbing evidence regarding Michael's mental state, evidence that would give anyone with an ounce of intelligence cause for concern. But since this is a Rob Zombie movie where everyone is really stupid, she immediately dismisses it, which honestly makes perfect sense. I mean, after all, he only had the dead body of a cat and photos of dead animals in his backpack. What's the worst that could happen?
Ow, my knees!
Later that evening, as Deborah gets ready for work, she tells Judith to take Michael trick-or-treating. But when her boyfriend comes over, she forgets Michael in favor of getting a little naughty.
Real freaking naughty.
So, with his Halloween ruined, Michael does what anyone who has to settle for candy corn would do and murders everyone in the house. First, in a moment that I think we can all agree is justified, Michael tapes Ronnie to a chair and then cuts his throat. He kills his sister's boyfriend with a baseball bat and eventually kills Judith by stabbing her 17 times. How do I know it was 17 times? Because I heard it on the news. Wait, how is the press here already? This literally just happened. And that's it. The backstory is over. Wait, sorry, my bad. We actually have another 20 minutes to sit through. In a decision that baffles the mind, we now get the pleasure of seeing what Michael's life was like while under the care of Dr. Loomis at Smith's Grove Sanitarium. And honestly, I think deciding to take a look at the psychology of Michael Myers could have actually been a good idea. Unfortunately, however, none of his psychology is explored at all. Instead, we just get to see him making a bunch of masks, eating Jell-O, and eventually killing an elderly nurse with a fork. Come on, really? Whose idea was it to give the violent psychopath a sharp object? Sadly, all this stress is too much for Deborah, so she decides to do what everyone watching this movie wishes they could do and puts herself out of her own misery. But, as a wise man once said,
"Do not pity the dead, Harry. Pity the living."
Because we're the ones who are stuck watching this movie that still has an hour to go.
I'm going to kill
myself and it's your fault!
We then cut to 15 years later, where Michael finds himself in a transitionary period of his life. Dr. Loomis has decided to quit his job, write a book, and dress like Steve Jobs for some reason, and Michael has decided to break out of the sanitarium by killing all the guards. How is he able to do that? By gross incompetence. Now, I'm no expert, but I would like to think that if I was a guard who had to transfer a 6'9", 300-pound violent psychopath, I would have enough common sense to know that sharing a small space with him would be a bad idea and that he would need more than one armed guard. But, like I said, I'm no expert.
I'm here!
So now, Michael makes his way to a nearby truck stop car wash, where we now get the pleasure of watching a truck driver take a massive dump. Unfortunately for him, before he can break out the Charmin, Michael interrupts, killing him with a knife and taking his coveralls. How did a massive masked man who is wearing a bathrobe and slippers manage to sneak past a garage full of people without being seen? I don't know. However, I think a better question would be, how did Michael know that his coveralls were the correct size? Well, you know what? We shouldn't worry about that, because now we know that Michael stole his iconic costume from a man who was taking a giant crap.
I got a Taco Deluxe Supreme talking back at me.
Anyway, the backstory portion of this movie is now over.
Yay!
Which means we can finally get to the Halloween part of this Halloween movie, the section of film where it becomes obvious that Rob Zombie was out of ideas, so he decided to fall back onto the remake trends that were popular at the time by essentially remaking the original movie. The story is the same, a lot of the dialogue is the same.
2 roadblocks and an all-points bulletin wouldn't stop a 5-year-old.
2 roadblocks and an all-points bulletin wouldn't stop a 5-year-old.
And even the characters are the same, but, you know, worse.
That's C-U-N-T.
So it's here that we meet this movie's version of Laurie Strode, who, just like in the original film, is dropping off some paperwork at the old Myers home for her dad's real estate business. And, just like the original, Michael has already made his way to his old stabbing ground to put the finishing touches on his new Halloween drip. And I'm just going to pause right here because there's something I want to point out. If the adult 6'9", nearly 300-pound version of Michael has to go through all this trouble just to recover this mask, then how did the 10-year-old, much weaker version of Michael hide it in the first place? Just look at all the damage that he's having to do to the floor just to find it. So surely he would have to do the same thing to hide it, right? So what happened? After he killed his family, did he hide the mask and repair the floor before the police got there? Who wrote this crap? Back at the sanitarium, Dr. Loomis suddenly becomes determined to find Michael and, just like the original version of the character, seems hell-bent on stopping him from hurting other people, which honestly seems like a strange decision considering the fact that just a few minutes earlier he seemed perfectly fine with washing his hands of Michael altogether, taking a book deal, and making money at speaking engagements. So, why is he suddenly concerned with the happenings of a former patient that he no longer had any interest in working with? Well, I'm really not sure, but if I had to guess, I would say it's because Rob Zombie realized that Dr. Loomis works better as a foil to Michael, instead of a self-serving, fame-hungry douchebag. But by the time he realized this, it was too late to change what was already written, resulting in this character shift that's about as subtle as this. Returning to Haddonfield, Laurie is joined by her 2 best friends, Annie and Linda, both of whom are really obnoxious. And both of whom are hoping that Laurie will agree to take over Annie's babysitting job for the night so that she can hook up with her boyfriend, Paul. However, before Laurie can give them an answer, she notices a strange man looking at her from the street. And because strange men going after young girls is a common occurrence nowadays, she decides that it's no big deal and agrees to babysit for Annie. Which brings us to Halloween night, where we see that Linda and her boyfriend Bob are using the abandoned Myers home for some much-needed naked time, which is unfortunate because Michael is still there, using his cunning and stealth in order to make them his next victim. And by cunning and stealth, I mean literally standing right above them and in plain sight. How did they not see him standing right there? This is why you should have a yearly eye exam, folks, because you never know when your lack of 20/20 vision will cause this to happen.
I understood that reference.
We then cut to Laurie's house, where her parents are looking forward to a night by themselves, as Laurie heads off to her babysitting job. Boy, I sure hope nothing happens to these nice folks. After making quick work of the Strodes, Michael moves on to another group of victims, Annie and her boyfriend Paul, who are making out on a couch. However, this bone session is interrupted as Michael kills Paul and shows Annie his Sean Connery impression.
You think it's good to slap a woman?
Yeah.
As I'm sure you all will agree, the idea of having to babysit 2 children is a literal hell on earth. So, in an attempt to free herself from this living nightmare, Laurie decides to take Lindsay back to her house so that Annie can finish the job that her parents are paying her to do. However, things quickly take a terrible turn when Laurie finds Paul's dead body is being used as a clever seasonal decoration, and that Annie lies bleeding on the floor. So, she calls the police for help. But when she sees that Michael is still in the house, she runs back to Tommy's house with Michael in hot pursuit. Luckily, the police arrive to save the day. Unluckily, they prove to be about as useful
The cock-flavored lollipop.
as Michael kills them quickly and kidnaps Laurie, taking her back to his childhood home. Why? So that he can show her an old picture of the 2 of them together in hopes that she will remember who he is. And by now, you're probably saying to yourself, she was adopted when she was a baby. What would make him think that she knows that he's her brother? You know what? That's a great question. However, I think a better question is, how does he know who she is? As we learn earlier in the movie, Sheriff Brackett was the first to arrive on the scene after Deborah Myers committed suicide. And when he found baby Laurie in the house, he took her to a nearby emergency room and I guess erased all knowledge of her from existence. So when she was adopted, she was given a totally different name and was from a totally different town. Her adopted parents didn't even know where she came from or who her real parents were. So the fact that Michael somehow knows that Laurie is his sister just because he saw her one time from a distance is just incredibly stupid. So much so that I'm convinced that this script was just a first draft that no one bothered to read. What else could explain a plot hole this big? Oh yeah, extreme incompetence. Anyway, Laurie manages to get back outside and falls into a pool. I mean, it's a large pool. I don't know how you don't see that, but whatever. And she ends up cornered by Michael with no place to go. But thankfully, Dr. Loomis has arrived to save the day by shooting Michael and taking Laurie to safety in a cop car.
This is the moment when the supposedly dead killer comes back to life for one last scare.
And it's here that we witness one of the most boring and mind-numbing chase sequences that have ever been committed to film, as Michael kills Loomis and Laurie goes hiding into the bowels of the house. And you know what? Let's just speed this part up. Then, Laurie falls out of the ceiling and points Loomis's gun at Michael. But before she can pull the trigger, he knocks her out of the window onto the ground below. Then they both wake up, she shoots him in the head, and the movie's over. The end, thank God. And when it's all said and done, the movie we end up with is just terrible. The script is riddled with plot holes and half-baked ideas, the characters are incredibly unlikable, and the dialogue is so bad that it's almost embarrassing to listen to.
Maybe I'll choke the chicken, purge my snorkel all over them flappy-ass tits.
Now, when I say riddled with plot holes, I actually mean 2 plot holes, but they're so big that if this movie was a cruise ship, it would have sunk to the bottom of the ocean faster than the Titanic. One of them I've already mentioned about Michael knowing that Laurie is actually his sister. However, the other one is regarding Laurie's adoption. As I also mentioned earlier, on the night that Deborah Myers killed herself, Sheriff Brackett found baby Laurie at her home. So, in an attempt to save the baby from the stigma of being the sister of Michael Myers, he decided to take her to a nearby emergency room and leave her there for the authorities to find. Now, you expect me to believe that no one noticed a cop car pulling up to a hospital and just abandoning a child?
Right.
And furthermore, he also mentions that he was able to pull this off because he omitted the baby from his police report, to which I say, this is horseshit! As we all saw from the media coverage that the Myers murders received, Deborah Myers would have been one of the most infamous people in the country, and especially in her own town, everyone would have known that she had a baby. And when the authorities arrived, the first place they would have looked would have been nearby fire stations and emergency rooms where desperate parents had been known to leave their children. The very notion that a baby happens to go missing the same night that its mother commits suicide and no one goes looking for it is just ridiculous. Now, when it comes to all all the extra stuff that was added about Michael's backstory, this movie manages to fail on two fronts. The first being that some of the ideas that are introduced are just immediately forgotten. For instance, the notion that we would see the psychological care that Michael underwent at the sanitarium while under the care of Dr. Loomis. Now, while I largely think that giving Michael a long backstory is kind of dumb, if you're going to go into it, then why not go all the way into it? But sadly, we don't. But its biggest failure is that the backstory elements are laughably cliche. Stop me if you've heard this before, but Michael is bullied, raised in a dysfunctional home, kills animals, and so on and so on. The only thing missing from this how to be a serial killer kit is some sort of sexual dysfunction. Now, defenders of this will probably say, that's how real serial killers are made. And yes, you're right. However, the only way to make this work would be for Michael to become like a real-life serial killer, where he follows a distinct profile. He kills a certain demographic or a certain type of person in very specific ways over the course of a long period of time. And, I'll just be honest, if Rob Zombie wanted to make Michael Myers the portrait of a serial killer, that might have actually kind of worked. I mean, it would have been way out of left field, and most people would probably say that it wasn't really a Halloween movie, but honestly, it would have been a better idea than this.
Bitch, I will crawl over there and I will skull fuck the shit out of you.
So normally by now, I would also go into the other points that I stated at the start of my closing about the characters being bad and the dialogue being garbage. However, because I feel like going over that again would just be overstating it, and because I'm really tired of talking about this dog movie, I'm just gonna wrap it up here and say that this movie is a giant waste of time, and it's just one more addition to a franchise that's full of terrible additions. But as John Carpenter once said,
my favorite part of this business is that when somebody wants to remake one of my films, what I do is I extend my hand like this, and they put a check right in my hand.
So I guess it all worked out in the end.